right, wow, it's packed. There's people still coming in. All right, we'll get started. We're kind of late. That is really sensitive. Wow. Welcome to Meshtastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. I'm Scott Thompson. I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Jon Marler. I'm a hacker, a ham radio enthusiast. This is my fourth talk so far at DC34, and my last one, hopefully my best one. And this is my first talk with Scott here, and this is his first talk at DEF CON, so.
Cool. I had somebody yesterday in one of John's talk ask me what a Meshtastic beast is, and I had to explain it's just me not knowing how to let go of a good pun. All right, higher now. Now we want to be sensitive. I had to explain that it's just me not knowing how to let go of a good pun. So, and sometimes I just take it a little too far. So bear with me a minute on the whole pun thing. Meshtastic beasts. All right, cool. All right, so first things first, we want to call out that this whole thing is not a dunk on Meshtastic, and I'm not just saying that because there's Meshtastic people in the audience here. We had a really good talk with them yesterday. They've been really supportive about this. This whole thing came from a talk that John and I had in an Uber, 2 years ago?
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Just saying, hey, we should see if we can do something crazy with Meshtastic, and it turned out it was easier than we expected to pull this off. And so kind of a couple of weeks ago, we switched the narrative from look at all the terrible things we can do with Meshtastic to let's make sure everybody knows what they're dealing with, how to operate it safely, what kind of problems you can run into, and frankly, how easy it was to do this. If two randos like us can pull this off, anybody can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because neither of us are hardware hacking gurus. We're not like firmware writing experts. We're not experts on ESP32 or any of that stuff. A lot of what we did was just experimenting with foundation LLMs and using those to write the code. And we both use LLMs in our work. And I'm a product manager. He's more of an engineer, and using the same methodologies that we use at work to code, test, write good acceptance criteria, and those types of things, we took that perspective into this project, and that's how we were able to get so far so quickly.
All right, so let's talk about what Meshtastic is for. If you've been on the Mesh here at DEF CON, I've heard anywhere from 1,500 to 6,000 nodes this year. Somebody called out yesterday that there were 2,500 nodes on the network. It was already huge. There's no way you can keep up with the chat. It's usually just blasting by way too fast for human consumption. There's a dashboard back here that John stood up that shows what's going on in the mesh. He's got a whole log. That's where the 6,600 count came from. Needless to say, it's a great product, great project, works really well. It's a cool way to quickly assemble meshes, send messages to people, and network effects apply here, right? It's super simple to get on board. So all your friends are on board. You want to talk to your friends, you got to be on Meshtastic too. All right, so let's talk about the threat model. If you have the DEF CON firmware for Meshtastic, the public channel's gone. But if you leave here and say, I don't want the DEF CON thing anymore, I'm going to go ahead and flash back to the regular Meshtastic channel, you'll have the basic standard channel with an encryption key of AQ00, which is well known. So you can't assume that your messages are private on a key like that. It's like we used to say about email. Think of it as a postcard, right? You're sending a message everybody can read. We're going to do the duet thing where we switch back and forth.
Yeah, we're going to kind of switch back and forth here, but the main point of this is, yes, there's encryption involved, but you have to understand what the encryption is for. And really with Meshtastic, if you're using a mesh that's in a city, like I came from Austin, we had a huge city. There's the default channel in there, but there's also Austin-specific channels. But even with those, the keys are shared. So just understand what that's for, what that means, and that gives you access and not necessarily confidentiality. So now we get to meet the beasts.
Again, I don't know how to let go of a good pun. We appreciate it. All right.
Okay, beast number one, the impersonator. So the whole point of this was we were trying to figure out, okay, can we pretend to be a node that we're not? One of the things that we noticed when we started looking at the firmware code in the firmware code that looks at the packets coming in, it says, oh, did they specify a node ID? Let's ignore that. And we're like, okay, well, we'll just comment that out. All right, now, sweet, I can spoof node IDs. Awesome. What else can I do with that? The other thing is there's some hardware out there where they hard-coded keys, and there were some applications that hard-coded keys. That's all well known. Whenever you're building a new protocol, you make mistakes, right? So we wrote a tool that allows you to spoof any specific node ID you want. You can specify a node ID. You can't do that on the stock firmware because there's protections built in for that, but we wrote our own firmware, so we can do whatever we want. And we're going to play with that some more, too.
Yeah, if you were on Def Connect last night, there was somebody named Cafe Babe that was sending random stuff out. That was me. Right. So just never trust a sender as authentic. It's good if you want to form meshes with people you know to know who they are, ensure that you're talking to the right people, especially if you're thinking about things like emergency communications, which gets talked about a lot with Meshtastic. You want to ensure the integrity of that whole network and know who you're talking to, because it is possible to change that out. Now, there's a spoiler alert. I'm going to go ahead and just call it out.
Yeah.
Talking to the Meshtastic guys last night, they've probably fixed all of this stuff. I haven't had time to rebase the repo and try to build on it and see if we can still do some of this stuff. The 2.8 firmware probably won't do this. However, I have the 2.7 firmware on the node I left sitting over there. So I can still do it, and you'll still see impersonated messages. You'll still see me transmitting from Null Island in the Atlantic, just off the coast of Africa. That kind of stuff can still happen, so just be aware of it.
Okay, so this next one is called the Puppeteer, all right? So one of the ideas we had was, what if, so this is all based on trust, right? Like I get a packet, and then you're going to trust that I'm going to acknowledge that I received the packet, and then I'm going to pass it on to the rest of the mesh. Well, I know your encryption keys. So what all can I do to that? Well, I can do all sorts of fun things. I can reverse all the text in your message. I can ROT13 encode your message. I can add a Rickroll URL to your message. If you supplied a URL, I can change it to my own URL. I can add a bit.ly code to it so I can track how many times it gets clicked. I can do all sorts of fun stuff. The reason this works is because, again, there's a trust, right? We know the encryption keys. And this works inside the channels, not necessarily in DMs. So like if I'm sending a DM from me to you, I know your encryption key, you know my encryption key, so that is not a public encryption key. This works in the channels. So, to use the postcard method, it's like me putting whiteout over the postcard and writing something else on it, or scribbling an appendage that 14-year-old boys like to scribble on things. We can do that too. So that's what the whole Puppeteer is. We could do some other things with this, but we'll get back into that. So, yeah.
Let me call out one more thing. The green text here, at the end of the deck, there's a repository, a GitHub repository that will give you a link to the QR code you can scan to get to the repository. Has all of this. So the Python files that you see here are available in that. The skills that we've run in Claude to do some of the stuff are also in there. So we have like / whatever. It's all in there for you.
Oh, there's one thing I forgot to mention. So one thing I forgot to mention, it's in there in the bottom in the OPSEC. One of the other things that you implicitly trust on a Meshtastic network is that when you give me a packet and I say I got your packet, then I'm going to pass it along to somebody else. Well, what if I don't want to? Well, with our firmware, you can just drop the packet. You can also decide to say I'm only going to drop packets for a specific channel because I don't like them. Or I can say I'm going to drop 20% of the packets or 50% of the packets because I'm going to make them feel like their radio's acting up or something. We can do that too. The other thing that we can do is you can set a maximum hop count in your packets. We can take that and amplify it to 255. So we just say, okay, everybody gets amplified to 255, and it just makes the packets bounce around and chews up time on the radio. The Saboteur. Oh yeah, so I've leaned into the Saboteur. So this is where I think I've already spoiled this one. But that's okay. So the Saboteur is the one where I'm talking about. We can basically kill messages. We can change the time to live. Changing the time to live just kind of creates busy time. It just makes the network more busy. It's kind of more like a disruption. Things will still get there eventually, but they could potentially bounce around a little farther than you would necessarily want them to do. So again, this is more about like, this works really well when everybody's behaving and everybody's agreed to cooperate, but they may not. And that one also has a tool. Oh, yeah. Do you want to talk about this one? Oh, okay. So what this one does, and this actually happened last year at DEF CON. And they wrote a really nice blog post about that. It was kind of neat that it had happened. But the way the little radios work, most of the radios are based on a small microcontroller like the ESP32. And they have maybe a mega RAM, maybe 8 megs of RAM. They don't have a whole lot of RAM. And they keep their node database in memory. So you can hold, like this little guy can hold about 250. The Heltec V3, like 1 meg, can hold like maybe 100. Since we already know, we can create our own node IDs because of with our firmware, we can specify node IDs. I can generate 1,000 node IDs and send packets out as fast as I can. What that does is, number one, it just looks like there's a whole bunch of people on the network that aren't there. If you try to route packets through them, the packets are never going to get anywhere because they're not real nodes. And also, it exhausts all the RAM on that little microcontroller. So if you haven't added your friends as favorites, then they'll disappear off the list. You won't be able to find them. Or you won't be able to find someone who's actually real to talk to if you want to send a direct message or something to someone that you'd actually like to talk to. You can also, with our tool, and kind of if you're using like say the Android app or the iOS app, you can also set those to a fake location. But with our tool, you can basically randomize it, or you can say at 000, which is, what were you calling that, Null Island? Null Island, yeah. And you can randomize it, so then all of a sudden you go look at the map in the app, and it looks like there's 10,000 nodes, and they're spread out all over the world, and they're somehow talking to you here in Vegas. I'm not like really hurting anything. This is just general chaos, right? But it does make the map look really interesting. So the point of that is you can't necessarily trust everything you see on the mesh when it comes to things like that.
All right, I'll end this one. Okay. All right, so there was some other functionality that was put into the repository that I did some extra planning for it. If you're standing over there by the table, if you look behind the table, there's a green ammo can sitting there with USB cables hanging out of it. That's actually a Faraday cage, because some of the things that we cooked up are, because of the squiggly FCC things here, are not the kind of thing you want to run on a public network and disrupt traffic with. So I built a Faraday cage, and I was going to run multiple radios in it. Well, the demo gods have not smiled on me this week, and we decided we're not going to try to make that happen in front of a live audience here. If you want to come by afterwards, I'll fire it up and see if I can get stuff to work and show you what it was going to do. One of the things that came from this was a talk last year in the RF Village was Meshtastic Under a Microscope. It was a great talk where the guy analyzed the entire thing, waterfall diagram, showed how everything worked. And he talked about a sync word that's used. This is a LoRa concept Meshtastic also adopted. So basically the radios send out a sync word 16 times in a row. Meshtastic uses 2B. I don't know if that was a Shakespeare reference or something. It sends 2B 16 times in a row so the radios can sync and understand when the start of the message takes place. And so the question I asked was, what if you just don't stop sending the sync word? What happens? It turns out it's pretty gnarly. It basically DDoSes the channel and the radios go offline. So what I wanted to do was set up 3 radios in that can over there. I had these little radios called null hop mesh toads, which are basically the radio itself, and I run the firmware in a VM on here that I wanted to demo so I could show in the logs, like here it's not getting traffic, that kind of stuff. Well, doing a demo, first of all, where you're trying to prove the non-existence of something is challenging, and plus, like I said, the demo gods did not smile on me. So that demo is toast, but if you want to come by afterwards, I'm happy to. I'll go sit in the hallway and do it if you guys want to watch, and we'll see if we can get it to work. But these are the details of what that was going to be. All right, we touched on this a little bit. John touched on it in his talk with Ham Radio yesterday. You can enable a Meshtastic radio for a licensed operation if you have a ham license. You put your call sign in, you switch it to license mode. I think you actually get a power boost. Yeah, you get a power boost for being able to do that. There are regulations when you're doing ham communications, you cannot encrypt your comms, right? So that goes off. So just beware. It's great to get the benefits of ham, but if you're doing it on Meshtastic, you'll also, or anywhere for that matter, you will not be encrypted. Everybody in this room knows that. And also, if you're relying on these radios for some kind of anonymity or not, people not knowing where you are, I mean, there's a room full of people here that could easily, like the guys over there with the antennas could easily direction find and locate exactly where your node is. They're doing it right now. That's kind of creepy.
There are also a lot of Karens that monitor the ham bands just waiting for people to break the rules, and they would love to do nothing more than spend their entire life to find you and make sure you are punished. Some people need new hobbies.
All right, so there's a couple of other technologies out there, and I've seen at least, I saw some mesh core stuff downstairs. I don't think I've seen reticulum here. I just wanted to be people aware. Yeah, I did hear people talk about it. There's other technologies out there. Meshtastic, I think, is by far the easiest and most approachable to get involved in. And I mentioned network effects earlier. There's 6,000 Meshtastic nodes here maybe, so guess what? If you want to talk to your friends, that's where you are. Mesh core is another one that's come up that's really interesting. Takes a little bit different approach. Reticulum, I would say, has the highest barrier to entry in terms of just getting started and understanding it and getting going with it. It's still very cool. So this is just FYI. There's other things out there like this, and then, they have different approaches to cryptography as well. All right, so this was the other thing that we wanted to talk about when we switched the narrative of this talk from let's blow up Meshtastic to, oh, wow, this was frighteningly easy and people should know. And I was a little concerned coming out here that talking about something that we basically vibe coded, yes, I did wear this shirt on purpose, that we basically vibe coded at DEF CON. Does anybody really want to hear that? It turns out we're in really good company because I was at a talk downstairs earlier about hacking IoT with AI, and this seems to be kind of the order of the day. Welcome to 2026, y'all. In our case, it took us 16-ish days. The ish is because we didn't start a timer when we got this kicked off. I just went back and looked and said, how many times did we commit? We were actually really diligent about doing that, about setting up our agents so that they would talk to each other and communicate and coordinate things. And it was 16 days of commits when we did it. And we're talking evenings, a couple hours here, a couple hours there, that kind of thing. It was surprisingly easy to do that. So the real message here is the attack floor, the ability of someone to do this is just near zero. The new firmware, I'm sure, takes care of a lot of that, but maybe there's more stuff, right? Let's keep going. But yeah, it's super easy now. And everybody kind of needs to think about that and keep it in mind. All right, so in the repository, there's a whole collection of tools. This is just the list of them, the firmware they run on, and what do you want to call it?
So when we say stock here, we're actually, all of our code is based on the 2.7.15 code base. We were thinking about rebasing it on mainstream, but it came so close to the conference, we're like, it works. Like, do we really want to play that game right before the conference? No, we're going to take the win. The point of our talk is less about here's a bunch of tools to cause chaos in Meshtastic. It's more about here's the process that we went through and how we got there and what we did when we finally got there. So when we say here that it's stock or evil, that's stock 2.7.15. I don't know if any of this stuff is going to work in 2.8 or what's on if you flashed with the DEF CON firmware instead of just joining the channels. We don't know. But all these tools are there's actually 4 repos. Oh.
I can actually say something about that. I did try to send a message with a different node ID last night on my updated radio with the DEF CON firmware, and it did not. It just didn't play. It didn't know what it was doing. It didn't know why it didn't work, so probably dig into it, but it didn't work. Yeah.
That makes sense. But some of these tools will run on the stock firmware, and then others won't. Like I know node injection won't run because that wouldn't run on stock 2.7.15, but that's okay. So do we have a slide on the repos, or I forget? Oh, okay. I'll talk more about the repos and how you get to it here in a second.
So doing the do it thing here, hand off the mic again. I just want to reiterate what I said earlier. Just because you're all running DEF CON firmware doesn't mean I am. I could still be on 2.7.1 and still do this stuff, and you'd still see some of the results of it, so just keep that in mind. All right, going back to keeping yourself safe, right? Remember, the encryption key is well known. Verify the identity of the people you're talking to. Assume things are broadcast. You're talking about postcards in the mail, right? I'm never going to put a slide up here where I recommend you stake life safety on anything, so I still think that's kind of funny to word it that way. People do talk about emergency communications with Meshtastic, and I think that's a great idea. The approachability really helps there, but just understand what you're doing and how the network works and how it can potentially work against you when you do that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I talked a little bit about emergency response and things like that in my first talk, but even if you do set your own like private encryption keys, just be aware that there are things you can do that you don't need to know the encryption keys for. So that's really all the point we want to get. Be sure you know what you're doing with your OPSEC.
Yes. Credit to the team. As I said, they've already updated a lot of stuff. He's saluting me. Yes. Well done. This was a list of things that came out of what we built, suggestions for how to improve it. It said here already underway. That was what was originally in the slide. I corrected it this morning. Maybe it's already done. It's entirely possible. I see some nods over there. It might actually be. So, all right. And here's the repo and the QR code. There's one main repo and links to the other three where you'll be able to see the firmware update, the device UI, because you've done it on your TDEC with the UI, and the toolkit.
Yeah, so there's the main repo is called Evil Meshtastic, and then there'll be links to the other repos inside that. And the device UI is for some of the Meshtastic nodes that we coded for, like the TDEC and this Heltec advanced thingamajiggy. They actually have UIs on the device, so we built in UIs for the evil tools on the device itself, so you don't even have to have a computer. But the tools repo has all the Python scripts that'll work in either some of the stocks, or definitely with our evil firmware. And then there's a firmware repo that's all the firmware that we have. We did publish a flasher. We didn't publish a flasher for a lot of reasons, but number one is I don't have like 5,000 different devices to test it on, and I didn't want to like brick everybody's stuff. So if you want to run the evil firmware, you're gonna have to download it and compile it and make it work yourself. One of the things that when we were working on this with Claude, I was looking into the different attacks, and I was like, oh, there were some known attacks on the admin channel. And so I said, hey, Claude, what about the admin channel? And it said, oh, yeah, I turned that on, and I turned off all the authentication and added all the evil tools to it. Great. And I'm like, well, could anyone on the network launch an attack with my node against the network? It's like, oh, yeah, that feature's already on. And I'm like, turn that off. And it's like, do you want a password on it? I'm like, no, turn the entire admin channel off. Like, just disable it. Like, I'm trying to attack people, not be attacked. So that's in there. So play with their firmware, have fun with it. There's some things that are broken in it. This thing randomly reboots. I don't know if that's the hardware, if it's my firmware. I don't know. Your mileage may vary. Please don't go to jail and say, I just went to a DEF CON talk and that guy John told me to play with this firmware. What do you mean that's a felony? Talk to him. Don't send them my way. I will not know who you are. I never was here. I did not give this talk. It's not in my GitHub repo. It is in my GitHub repo. That's okay.
And if you work for Universal Entertainment, don't sue me over the pun.
Also that. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you, Ham Radio Village, for hosting us. How did Scott do for his first talk? I think he did pretty well. So check us out, and if you appreciate the stuff we have here in the Ham Village, drop $1 or $2 in the little box out there, and have a fun conference. Be safe. If you do bad stuff, don't get caught.